Ian here with Minuteman Theory. So in this month's article, or this month's blog, I talked about reloading. So one of the things that we're going to start doing here on Minuteman is we're going to do a blog, and then we're going to do a video kind of to support that blog in case you guys have any questions. The issue that I'm running into with the blog that I made is YouTube isn't exactly friendly as far as reloading goes, because it violates their standards for making ammunition. So what we're going to try and do is I'm going to try and visually show everybody what I have, what it does, and the process for it without actually making any ammunition. So we're going to try and skirt that. Now, if you want more detail and actually how to build your own ammunition, then you can go over to the blog and it'll all be written down. So let's get started. We're going to do this step by step by step. And in reloading, there are multiple steps. But the first step that you should always do without question is read the book. Okay? This is a spear manual. I've had this book since 2010 when I started reloading. Inside, it's got all the information that you're going to need as far as it talks about burn rates with powders. It talks about what different powders do, the difference between rifle powders and pistol powders, the SAMI specs for the chamber pressure inside your rifle, what the different cartridges can do, and it's got different recipes and loads for the different cartridges. I've used this extensively. In fact, when I first started, I read this entire book from cover to cover. You know, I didn't look at every single one of the loads, but for loads that I had, I would go in and I would mark each one. So it's 5.56, 308, all that stuff. Again, if you're getting into reloading, read the book. Okay, I can't stress that enough. This is going to be all your safety information. This is going to be your load data. And another thing as far as load data goes, listen to the book, okay? If the book says only 45 grains of powder for maximum load on this cartridge, only put 45 grains. Don't think that, 46 grains is good. You're going to end up running into chamber pressure issues and your overpressure issues with your firearm. And I have seen firearms where people said, "Oh, I can push this a little further," and they end up blowing their gun up. It's especially important with pistol powders. You start getting into pistol powders and you start double charging loads. I have seen guys blow their guns up. I've actually factually seen the after effects of what happens. One guy double loaded a 45 ACP. He was shooting a hot load, double loaded it, and it blew his gun up. His gun was in 3 pieces, and my friend had to try and put this gun back together. He finally ended up telling him it's impossible. The frame's cracked, slide's cracked. You need a brand new gun. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the information that's in this book, okay? We want to make sure we're using the correct powder. We want to make sure that we're using pistol powder in pistols and rifle powders in rifles. It'll be very clear, as far as what the powder is, where it's supposed to go. We don't ever put pistol powders in rifles. There's guys out there that say, "Oh, you can do..." I'm telling you not to. I'm telling you to never put pistol powders inside of a rifle because they have a different burn rate. And it won't be slow. It won't be a slow push. It's a crack because you have a lot less barrel. You get a lot less velocity out of it. So my personal opinion is that you never, ever put pistol powder in a rifle. Now you can put rifle powder in a pistol. I don't know why you do that, but the burn rate is different. It's not gonna, pistol powder is more of an explosion. It's more violent than a rifle powder is. So with all that out of the way, I'm going to show you from start to finish how we would theoretically make a round of ammunition. So the first things first, you want to go find your brass. So go to your local gun range. I guarantee you there's brass there. I guarantee you it isn't picked up all the time. You want to look for the brass that is make and match of your gun. So if you shoot a 9mm, you want to be looking for 9mm brass. If you shoot a 223, you want to make sure you're looking for 223 brass. So on and so forth, okay? If you're into firearms and you're shooting, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you already know, that you could put a 38 in a 357, not vice versa. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that you know that. So when you're grabbing your brass, you want to make sure that it's actual brass. So there's 3 types. There's brass, there's aluminum, and there's steel. Now, steel is really bad for your dies. It'll chew your dies apart, and you don't want to mess with steel. Aluminum, it can only be shot once, so I don't ever mess with aluminum. And then even for brass, there's 2 types of brass that we want to pay attention to. There's boxer primed, and then there's Berdan primed. Boxer primed, actually I can show you. Boxer primed is this. There's one single hole right here, right? That's boxer primed. And that's when you use your die, there's a spike that comes down to push the used primer out. That only works for boxer primed. Berdan primed has two holes, one at the top and one at the bottom, and they're smaller. So when you go to put it inside your press and pull down, all you're going to do is destroy your decapping or all your depriming spike. That's all it's going to do. I've done it before. I think everybody's done it before. You know, you go and you're just picking up brass. You're not paying attention. You come home, you tumble it, you make it clean, and you just throw it in, and all of a sudden, crunch. And then, you know, you got to look. Now you got to look and make sure that all the rest of your brass isn't Berdan primed. So, yeah, always be on the lookout for that. If you get a whole bunch of it, just, check a couple with your flashlight. Make sure that there's one single hole, not a whole bunch, not two different holes. And, yeah. So, we want to make sure when we get our brass home, again, we're going to visually inspect everything. We're going to visually inspect our brass. We want to stay away from the stuff that's corroded. We want to stay away from the stuff that's obviously cracked or any other anomalies that, you could just look at and go, that doesn't look right. If it doesn't look right, get rid of it. There's plenty more out there. Brass is the cheapest part of this whole process. So if you run into a piece of brass that you're not sure about, get rid of it and get a new piece. So I have a vibratory cleaner. Okay, this is a Lyman. What do they call that? It's a Turbo Pro 1200. I've had this forever. So what this uses is crushed up corn cob or walnut media. Oh, they'll get all over the floor, of course. So basically, it's just ground up. It's just ground up pieces of either walnut or corn cob or whatever, and the vibratory action cleans the brass. So you put it in there for an hour, maybe two, and it the tumbling and the media hitting up against it cleans the brass. That's only really good for the outside of the brass. Now the primer pocket doesn't really get cleaned, and the inside of the brass doesn't really get that clean. There are guys who use sonic cleaners, and Thumbler's Tumbler is one of the other ones. So they use stainless steel little cylinders, and those will clean out the inside and the primer pocket of your brass. But I've never really gotten into it because this just seems to work fine for me. I haven't really had an issue with it, and it's cheap. The walnut is cheap. I know that you got to buy specific distilled water, and I like that the walnut median's cheap, and I can clean out the primer pocket myself. So yeah, that's I know one guy for sure that has it, has a Thumbler's Tumbler, and he really likes it. The other thing that you got to realize with using tumblers with water involved is that you need to get the brass out and dry it out immediately because it'll start to corrode. Just something that I don't really want to spend the time dealing with, throwing it in the oven or whatever, whatever the case may be there. So the next step is we're going to use the press. Now, as you can see, in this press, there is right here. So this piece right here and this piece right here. So these work in tandem. So what this does is this pops the primer, the old primer out, and this sizes the neck. So it extends. So after you shoot, typically the necks are small, but when this goes in, what it'll do is it'll expand the neck so that you could get a proper projectile in there. Usually they crimp down a little bit, and then when they're fired, or they'll go from being wider than normal, and then this will force the throat and the neck up against the sides and make it tighter so that you can actually put the projectile in there. So once that is done, we're going to visually inspect. Again, some of these issues that you have with brass don't become apparent until you start working with them. So when you start putting them in the press and stuff like that, you won't see these cracks or whatever it is. You won't see it until you've actually messed with it a little bit. It all looks good, and then you put it inside. I've had plenty of cases where it's like I go to put it in, pop the primer out, and size it, and I look, oh man, the neck has a crack in it. Throw it away. Don't even waste your time with it. So once we've gotten done depriming it, depriming it and sizing it, The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to throw it back in the tumbler just because I want to, you know, I like keeping my stuff clean. And oh, that was the other huge thing we got to remember with these. Oil. Oil is your best friend. As you can see, I have some oil right here. What'll happen is if you go to put a piece of brass inside here, it's gonna get stuck, and it's gonna take a long time for you to get it out because, you know, the friction and all that. You have to make sure that your cases are lubed when they go into the die. Some dies you don't need it, but for the ones that I have, you do. Obviously, these ones are cheaper than some of the other ones, but just make sure you are using oil, you're using some form of lubricant, because once it gets stuck in there, it is an absolute bear to get it out. Like, it took me hours and hours and hours, and I honestly thought I was going to have to get rid of the die. I thought I was going to have to throw the die away and start over again. So, again, make sure you're using oil. That said, the next thing that we want to do, once we've got it deprimed and sized, is we're going to switch over to here. Now, in this book, I'll just flip to any page here. All right, so right here, it says there is a maximum case length, okay? Right where my finger is. It says that for this particular one, it is a 2.549. So we take out our calipers. We go all the way to 2.5, and then 49. Okay, so we're at 2.549. I don't know if you guys can see that, but you can see that the 2 is the big one, and then we go to the smaller 5, and then we go to the 49, which is the 49 is actually on the dial right here. That is the maximum length that this case can be. So what I like to do is I like to do the trim to length, which would be 2.539. So what we're going to do is we're going to back this off. 2.5, we're still at 2.5, we'll go to 39. So right there. So we're at 2.539. Then what I'll do is I'll take the case and I'll measure it. And then I stick it in here. And now this is also a Lyman, and this is a case length trimmer. So as you can see, it's got little fins on it. They're actually super sharp, and what they'll do is they'll cut just a little bit off the front of the case, so then that way it goes to the trim to length. Now, with all the cases that I have, I go to trim to length with everything. Doesn't matter what it is, I go to trim to length because I want everything to be uniform. When you're talking about long range shooting, uniformity and consistency is what we're looking for. We're looking for the same thing to happen every single time. Now, with the other video that you saw, with me long range shooting, one of my buddies was judging my reloads, and I got to be honest with you, I was actually pretty let down by my handiwork. So there was a difference of 50 feet per second in between the 5-shot string. The largest maximum velocity was, there was a 50 feet per second basically difference between the one round that I shot and the other round that I shot, and that really made me upset. So I'm proud of my reloading. I've had friends kill multiple different game animals in multiple different states with my ammunition, so that I'm proud of. But when we're talking about long range accuracy, every little bit matters. We want to make sure that we're getting consistency, loaded the same way, the same time, the same powder. That way we can start dialing stuff in. We can dial our scopes in. We can know exactly what's going to happen when it makes that impact down range. So always to the trim to length with this, just because, again, it's a good starting point. So once we go to the trim to length with this, you're going to see, I'll actually show you. I actually have a few right here. So if you look, you can see how it's shiny right there. Yeah, so that's a ring of brass, and so that's super uneven, and we need to make sure that we trim it off, or we clean it off. So you can do all these things at the exact same time. Well, not at the exact same time, but you could do them, all in the same batch. So here we have the case. We have the RCBS case cleaning station. So right here we have a primer pocket cleaner. So this is a metal brush, and it cleans out the inside. It'll be nice and clean, and you can see that's nice and clean. I'll show you one here that hasn't been cleaned yet. I wonder if I deep prime. Oh, they've all been. So what you'll see is a bunch of black stuff right here. When the primer goes off, it's just like soot inside of a chimney. So what'll happen is it smacks it. The firing pin smacks it, and then it explodes, and it goes through that small little hole right there. Well, what'll end up happening is creosote and stuff will get stuck on the back side of, it's where the primer pocket, it's called the primer pocket, where the primer pocket is. So what I do is I clean it out. And the reason I do that is, again, consistency. We want to make sure that the primer is going in the same depth, the same way every single time. Now, if we take away all that unevenness, that was in there when the primer went off, then we can set the primer the same way every single time. It'll be the same depth. So then next, what I'll do is I will trim the outside. I will trim the outside with this. And what this is a what do they call that? Swaging tool. So it'll take a little bit of brass from the inside, and you can see it dumps, it dumps little chunks. I don't know if you can see that from there, but anyway, it'll dump little chunks of brass, and that's a good thing. We want to make sure that we're getting rid of all the excess that's right there. Then I'll do on the outside. So we want to make sure that everything is even. We have a little bit of a bevel on the inside, but the outside is also smooth. So the outside is going to be very smooth, and the inside is going to have a little bit of a bevel. I can show you with this. So you can see the outside is very, very, very smooth. Okay, there's no burrs or anything like that. But if you look on the inside, if I can get the camera the light to hit it just right, you can see there's a little bit of a bevel right there, just like a knife. That's what we're looking for. And the reason we do that is so that the projectile seats inside the cartridge easier. There's a little bit less, and then what we can do is we can take, once the projectile is in the cartridge, we can fold the cartridge onto the projectile just a little bit. That's called neck tension. And so we want to just make sure that it's just a little tiny bit. That way it's not moving around, and when we're firing and it's under recoil, the projectile isn't going into and out of the case, and it's also not spinning freely. So yeah, it's just, it's like hooks, basically. We just want to in like this just a little bit, and then that way it stays where it's supposed to. So then we have the flash hole deburr. Sorry. So what this is, and I'll show everybody close up. What this is it looks almost like a drill bit. Right? So you can see that this bell here is set with the set screw. That is awesome. I like that. That way you can set it and forget it, basically. Again, same thing with this. I will set it, but every couple rounds or every couple cases, I will take out my calipers and I will measure just to make sure. So what this does is when ammunition comes from the factory, sometimes in the flash hole there's a little bit of a burr. So when it comes off the line, there's however it punches through, there's a little bit of a burr on the inside. You can't see it, but it's there. Actually, sometimes you can see it. I've seen it before. But normally you can't see it. So what it does is it'll actually mess up how the primer gets an even burn with the powder. So what you have to do is you have to take one of these tools and you put the case on top of it and you spin it around, and this swages out this gets rid of that burr. So then that way you have a direct line from the primer to the powder, and you get a nice even burn. Even burns are super important. Now, this is all stuff that we can't, or what am I trying to say here? We can't feel, we can't hear, we can't see it with the human eye. We're talking about nanoseconds, but those nanoseconds count. We want a nice clean burn. We want that primer to not have anything in the way, so that when it goes off, it hits that powder and it immediately goes off. We want a nice even burn. Then, when we're done with that, again, I will stick it back in the case cleaner, just because I like to keep it clean, and I like to pull it out and inspect it and make sure that there's nothing new that happened, no things that I need to be concerned about. After we're done with that, once everything's cleaned up, we're going to take our priming tool. Now, again, I don't want to violate the YouTube guidelines, so there's a lot of stuff that I'm not, that I'm just not, we're not actually even going to put a case on here. What this does is if you put the, let's hope I don't violate them. So what this is this holds the primers. What we do is put it in here, and then the primers by gravity will feed into here, and then one at a time, you'll take your case, put it on, push up, and it'll prime it. There's a couple things that we need to be leery of when we're doing this. One, don't ever, ever, ever point it towards your face, okay? There is no primers, there is no, there's no case in here. We don't want to be going like this and watching it go in. Some colleagues of mine, whom I trust, I don't have a reason not to trust them, have told me that they've had primers go off when they're priming them. So we want to, just like we're firearm safety, right? We want to point it in a safe direction. This is not a safe direction, okay? There's quite a bit of power in a primer. You could definitely lose an eye. If you're looking at it and it goes off and it goes into your eye, you could definitely lose your eye. I mean, it's hot gases, just like a projectile or just like a cartridge. There's a lot of hot gas inside of a primer. So we want to make sure that when we're priming it, we're pointing it in a safe direction, and we're doing it gentle, not gentle, but it's supposed to feel smooth. If you start to feel it jerking or it's not going in right, there's two things we need to check. One being that the primer is going in straight. So when I say straight, when you put the primers in here, you're going to look at the flash cup, and there's actually going to be an anvil, and it's going to look like an X. It looks just like an X. Well, it's a three-part, but you'll see it when if you start messing with it, you'll know what I'm talking about. We want to make sure that the primer is going straight up into the cartridge, okay? We want to make sure that it's not going in sideways, that it's not off just a little bit. That's what we're looking for. We want it to be smooth but firm. We don't want it to feel chunky. The next thing that we need to be concerned about is making sure that the case that you're using doesn't have a military crimp. So they have primer crimps, and what that is it's just how the military keeps the primers in. With full auto fire, the recoil can dislodge the primer. So what we want to do, or what the military does, is they make it almost looks like it's just punched over, like when you pin your castle nut. That's what it looks like. So there'll be 1, 2, 3 holding that primer in. You're going to need to swage that out with this right here if that's an issue. It's entirely possible that you run into military grade brass. You're going to have to swage it out. And the only way to find out if it's got a primer crimp is to look at it, a little bit of experience. That's how I figure out that it has it. I look at it, I go, oh, okay, there's a crimp. It could be a 3 crimp or it could be 1 solid. You're going to have to swage it out. So once we get done with priming, the next step is powder. I have a lot to say on powder. So powder is one of those things where when you are pouring powder, you don't do anything else, okay? No conversations, definitely no drinking alcohol, no, watching TV, none of that. When you are pouring powder, you are pouring powder. You need every one of your brain cells focused on what you're doing right there. Things happen, right? Things happen all the time. My experience with pouring powder was my friend who, fixed the other guy's gun because it blew up because he did a double charge. My personal experience was when I first started, I was making a batch of 545 ACP rounds. I'm going, I'm, listening to, having a conversation with my roommate, watching TV, this, that, the other thing. Well, as it turns out, there were a few that I didn't put any powder in. So out of a batch of 500, there were a few without powder. How are you supposed to know which ones have powder and which ones don't? You can weigh them, but they're all, within. It was an absolute pain. I had to go back and dismantle 500 rounds of 45 ACP and start all over again, pouring the powder and seating the bullet. I wasted 500 rounds worth of powder because once it comes out and it goes into, so we have a bullet puller, right? Good bullet puller. So here's my bullet puller. So you smack it down, and the inertia pulls the bullet out, and it sets up against this. Man, I don't know what's in this bullet puller. I don't know, if there's something in here that's going to mess with the powder. So I had to throw all the powder out and restart over again. Luckily, that was back in the day when it wasn't $1 million to reload. So we're going to pour powder. The other thing that, I don't have my scale out, but we want to make sure that we're triple, quadruple checking what we're doing. We want to, once we get the powder flowing to the, so what we'll do is there's a set screw right here. Okay, we're going to mess with the set screw. We're going to bring it out if we want more, push it in if we want less. Then we're going to measure it. And the way that the measuring works is mine has a series of weights, and you put the weights on where you want the powder to be, and it'll bring it all the way down. So it'll bring there's a pylon, and then there's an arm. We want the pylon and the arm to be completely lined up, right? So we want to make sure that means that everything's even. So what we'll do is we'll turn it out. Okay, we want more. Pour it in the scale. Okay, so that's too much powder. Okay, we want less. Okay, that's where we want to be. Once we have that dialed in, we're going to mess with the set screw right here. And we're going to turn it so that that the other screw can't move. And then we can go through and start loading our projectile, or loading our cases. Every couple cases or so, I will go back and verify on the scale that it is in fact what we want it to be. Again, I know I probably already went over it, but we want to make sure we're following the manufacturer's recommendations, right? We want to make sure that, if it says 45, we're not putting 46. More powder doesn't equal more velocity. And in fact, more powder can actually decrease accuracy. There's a whole bunch of factors at play. So once we get done pouring powder, that's when we seat our bullets or seat our projectiles. So we want to take our projectile, and so normally what I'll do is I will make one full cartridge that doesn't have any powder or any primer or anything like that inside it. And then I will put it into my firearm to make sure that it's cycling correctly. So this is where we get into cartridge overall length. So let's go to, here we go. 30 carbine. I used to reload 30 carbine. So right here, we're going to have a cartridge overall length right here. So right here. So for this one, it's going to be 1.625. Cartridge overall length is actually quite an interesting topic in the reloading world because there's a few things at play. One, for you magazine-fed service rifle guys just like me, your magazine is going to dictate how far out that projectile can be. So there's a theoretical, not even a theoretical. So basically, you don't want your projectile to be seated too deep inside the case. If you seat the projectile too deep in the case, you run into issues with chamber pressure. Again, that's not something we want to deal with. We want, exactly what the SAMI specification is, and no more, no less. That's what we're going for. But you can actually seat the projectile out further. The reason we do that for bolt guns is so that there's not any throat or chamber jump. So what that is, I don't want to mess with that. So what that is when you have the projectile or you have the cartridge loaded into your gun, basically what you want is the very, very tip of the projectile to be up against the land and grooves of your firearm. The reason we do that is because if we have chamber jump or throat jump, it's when the projectile is loaded in, but it doesn't actually hit the lands and grooves. It's just kind of sitting there in free space, right? And and we're talking microns. We're talking absolute microns of distance here. But it makes a difference, right? So, basically the projectile is going to go off, or the cartridge is going to go off. And for a couple of, microns, the projectile isn't going to have something to buck up against, something to hold it, something, we want it to go right in and start turning. So what it's going to do is it's going to warble just a little bit and then go in and start turning. We want to, so that's where the issue is. So the way that we deal with that, the reason they have cartridge overall lengths is because we don't want recoil to start messing with the projectile, right? So we don't want the projectile to, under recoil, go forward or back or become loose or things like that. But you can kind of play with it just a little tiny bit if you're using a bolt gun, and even with some service guns. If you're running a 90 grain projectile in your AR-15, which you can do, it's just going to be a single shot. For bolt guns, yeah, you can definitely play around with it. For gas guns and magazine-fed guns, not as much. You're definitely limited to how wide or how long your magazine is what your cartridge overall length can be. So, kind of take the good with the bad. If you're loading a bolt gun and you want extreme accuracy, you can definitely push that cartridge overall length out just a little bit so that you're touching the lands and the grooves. So, once that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to take it out and we're going to visually inspect it again. This will be like one of 10 times that I visually inspect it. This will actually be the last time that I'll visually inspect it. So then I'll put it in a bag or an ammunition can, but I'm going to label exactly what the powder was that I used and when the date was that what the cartridge overall length was and what the date was. The reason we do this is back in the day, reloading was cheap. You could reload 223 or 5.56 for like 15, 20 cents a round. You could reload 9mm for 10 cents a round. That's not the case anymore. Now, the whole push for reloading is for maximum accuracy out of your firearm, right? Like, you can do ladder loads. The world is your oyster as far as reloading with, as far as reloading for accuracy. I'm sorry, things that used to be, primers used to be $30 for 1,000. Now they're 120, 130 bucks. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. So now what I've transferred to is absolute accuracy. Now that's why we label it so that we know, okay, this is Ian's load from 2023. This is not 62 grains. This is 40 grains of X powder, and this is the cartridge overall length. And that's how we're able to determine, because again, when we're shooting long range, consistency. Once we get that batch of ammunition that works really, really well in our gun, we want to keep continuing to make that batch. And then that way, when you go to load it, you're going to know that this is the right one, especially if it's labeled. Now me, I'm guilty just like everybody else. I go, it's 45. In the tub it goes, That's not when we're doing rifle stuff and we're doing long range work, that's where you want to label it. Finally, you want to make sure that you're putting it in a cool, dry place, okay? Ammunition lasts indefinitely, and I have training ammunition, and I have actual ammunition that I would use in case of an emergency. And that stuff that I use in case of an emergency doesn't get touched. I always go, I go through it, I make sure it's all still there, I make sure there's no glaring, like corrosion or anything like that, but it stays put. So guys, if you're interested, I wrote a whole blog about this. There's way more to it than what I went over, but again, I'm not trying to get any YouTube strikes or anything like that, especially for our channel. But if this is something that you're interested in, go ahead and get a hold of me over on the Minuteman, MinutemanTheory.com. There you'll see the blog. Get a hold of me. If I can help you out, I absolutely will. But again, we're following the book. When we're pouring powder, we're paying close attention. We're not doing anything else. And when we're putting primers in, we're making sure we're putting them away from us. Now, I'm not going to get into the legalities of everything, but I am going to say in closing, if you get into a self-defense situation, or you feel like you're going to get into a self-defense situation, do not use your reloads. Do not. Make sure you are using factory ammunition in your carry gun. If factory ammunition, if you want to hunt with them, great. By all means, go hunt with them. But do not use them in a self-defense situation. Do not. Okay? Lawyers will go absolutely crazy, try to pin you up as something that you're not. use them for game, use them for training, and you know, if the world decides to take a sudden turn, then we'll talk about that when it comes to it. But as of this moment, factory ammunition for all your self-defense needs. Hey guys, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you on the next one.